This presentation is about the mysteries and magic behind the creation and destruction of money. I'm going to use a simple model based on the U.S. economy that starts out with you, and then there's your employer, and a bank, and the Treasury, which is part of the government, and the Federal Reserve, which is a private bank. And let's say that the government wants to order a product. And so it places an order and you do some work and you then ship the product to your employer who ships it to the government. Now in order to pay for this product, since there's no money in our economy, the government needs to create some new money. It turns out that in this system all money comes into existence through debt. And so the first step in this process is that the Treasury needs to create something called a bond. And this is a Treasury bond, which is basically a promise to pay the face amount of the bond plus some interest at a future date. This is really, it's backed by the government's ability to tax its citizens, namely you in this case. So it's really a lien against your future earnings potential. So now in order to sell this bond, the Treasury sends it to the Fed, and one of the Fed's jobs is to manage the sale of bonds for the Treasury. However, since there's no money in this economy yet, the Fed itself is going to buy this bond. And the way that it does that is it just creates some money out of thin air. And when I say out of thin air, what I mean is that there's no gold or silver backing this money. It's really just bits in a computer. And it's the Fed has the ability to do that based on powers that were granted to it by Congress back in 1913. So now the next step is that the Fed sends that money to the Treasury, and the Treasury then writes a check and sends it to your employer. Your employer deposits it in the bank and writes another check which sends that money to you. So now you're holding that $1,000 and in the bank in your checking account, and this first $1,000 that's backed by this Treasury bond becomes what's called bank reserves. Bank reserves are important because they are the foundation upon which all banks are able to create new money for loans. And another thing that's interesting about this is that this is one of the primary processes that which cause inflation. So it's the Fed's ability to create this new money and have the government spend it into the economy that is one of the core causes of inflation. So now at this point you might say, well, you'd like to exchange this money for some cash. And in fact, you might also back up and ask, well, why didn't the Treasury just pay your employer originally with some cash? Just print up some dollar bills and pay your employer that way. And the answer is that that's not actually how dollar bills are used, and it's not how they're inserted into the economy. The government never pays its bills with cash like that. However, if you wanted to take this $1,000 and exchange it for cash, you could do that now that it's in your checking account. And the way that works is your bank would place an order for cash from the Federal Reserve, and then the bank could exchange that cash for your checking account balance. So this process of exchanging cash for checking account balance is really the only way that cash comes into the economy. It's the only way that cash is inserted. But we're not going to do that in this case. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to have your employer go to your bank and take out a loan. And in this case, the loan is going to be for the maximum that this bank could provide, which is $9,000. And the reason that that's the maximum is that if you take this initial reserve amount and you divide it by the sum of the loan amount plus reserves, so that's 1,000 divided by 10,000, that is the reserve ratio, which in the United States is 10%. And so if that loan amount was any higher than the reserve amount, or the reserve ratio would be below 10%, and so it's not possible. So 9,000 is the most that your bank can lend. But the interesting part here is that when a loan it comes into existence, what happens is that there's two pieces. There is a loan and there is some money in your employer's checking account. And these are really totally bookkeeping entries. Loans are not made based on reserves. Loans are brand new created money that the bank, like the Federal Reserve, created out of thin air. So again, these are just bits in a computer that your bank is legally allowed to create. So now with this, and this money also, like the money from the Treasury and the Fed, came into existence through debt. If your employer had not borrowed this money, it would not exist. So now that your employer has this money in its checking account, let's say it wants to spend it, and also notice that the bank was actually able to create 9 times more money than the Fed did. So banks are actually a much larger source of inflation than the Fed. So now your employer wants to spend this money, and so you do some work. It's going to maybe your employer wants to improve the production capacity of its factory or something like that, and it pays you for this work. It pays you part of the 9,000 that it received, and it spends the rest at the bank, paying off the interest on its loan. Let's say the interest was 10%, so that's $900. And so at this point now, let's say that the bank wants to come to you and place an order for a product which you create and you send to the bank, and then you charge them $900. So over time, the natural process is that in the absence of inflation in particular, that prices will go down as production quality improves. So we've illustrated that here. The price is a little lower that the bank pays than what the Treasury pays, 900 instead of 1,000. And so notice now at this point that the bank and the Treasury or the government both have product, but you have all of the money in the economy. And this shows how the real source of wealth in an economy is the ability to produce. So you as the producer have collected all of the money, and you would continue to collect more money if there were any in the economy because you're the only one producing anything. The rest are strictly consuming. So now at this point, let's say you want to spend your money. You want to exchange this work that you've done for something real. So you approach your employer and you want to buy something from them. Maybe it's a factory or something like that. So your employer then provides this item or title to it to you, and you then send it the money, all of the money that you've received, the full 10,000. And your employer then takes 9,000 of that and sends it back to the bank and pays off the loan. Now, when a loan is paid off, that money actually completely disappears from the economy. That money is destroyed and is no longer present in the economy at all. So now we're back to the point of only having $1,000 left in the economy. So let's say that the government now taxes your employer's windfall profits here, retrieves that remaining $1,000, and with that money in hand, it's able to pay off the bond. Let's say the bond was 0% interest, which is not exactly right, but it's close enough for our example. And so now that money and that bond disappear, and we're back to the situation of having zero money in the economy because all of the loans have been paid off. This is actually directly analogous to real life, in that in the United States, because all money is debt-based, if the entire national debt, and that $1,000 bond is also directly analogous to the national debt in the U.S. So if the entire national debt and all bank debt were completely paid off, then all money would disappear from the economy because all money is debt-based. Money only comes into existence through debt. Now notice here that you've received some assets in exchange for your labor, so it looks like a pretty fair deal for you, but that the government and the bank they've received assets, and what have they really done? They have just created money out of thin air, created these bits and spent them into the economy. So although it looks fair from your perspective, it's a pretty sweet deal from the government and the bank's perspective. And that's how the creation and destruction of money works in the U.S. economy.